Something is breaking in Cleveland, and I don't think most people have fully grasped the weight of what's unfolding right now. Not the surface-level drama, not the headlines about trade requests and missed workouts. I mean the deeper structural fracture that's been building underneath this franchise for years, and is now finally cracking wide open at the worst possible moment. Because here's the thing about fault lines. They don't announce themselves. They accumulate pressure quietly, invisibly, until one day something shifts and suddenly you can see the entire landscape differently. That's where the Cleveland Browns are right now, and the two names at the center of it, Myles Garrett and Shedeur Sanders, are connected in ways that the mainstream NFL conversation keeps dancing around without ever fully landing on. Let me set the scene for you, because the sequence of events here matters enormously. Voluntary workouts happen. Shadur Sanders is in the building, early, locked in, getting mic'd up by the organization for content. He's smiling, competing, doing everything a franchise quarterback is supposed to do when the organization gives him the platform. And Myles Garrett, the best defensive player in professional football, the man who just shattered the NFL's all-time single-season sack record, is not there. Not injured, not excused for some personal family matter. He chose not to be there. He made a deliberate decision to absent himself from a building he has called home for 8 years, while the franchise he has carried on his back on the defensive side of the ball continues making decisions that he apparently no longer trusts. When you put those two images side by side, Shedeur thriving inside the facility and Garrett choosing to stay outside it, you're not looking at a coincidence. You're looking at a statement. And I think the people running that organization understand exactly what both of those images mean, even if they're not ready to say it out loud yet. I want to start with Garrett, because I think his situation has been significantly underexplained in the national coverage, and the man deserves to have his perspective represented with the full context it requires. When Garrett sat down with Rich Eisen, he didn't come in hot. He didn't storm through the door with grievances. He flew straight from the airport, no media handler prepping him, no PR filter smoothing out his edges, and he said something that I've been thinking about ever since. He said he looked at where this organization is heading and arrived at the quiet, devastating conclusion that the trajectory doesn't align with what he came to Cleveland to accomplish. 8 years. 8 years of elite, generational production. And not a single playoff run that felt like it was genuinely pointed toward a championship. Now think about what it takes to actually say that publicly. Myles Garrett is not an impulsive person. He's not the kind of athlete who fires off emotions before thinking through consequences. The man reads poetry. He sculpts. He approaches everything in his life with a deliberateness that most professional athletes never develop. And when someone like that sits across from a camera and calmly communicates that they've evaluated their situation and found it lacking, you have to understand that the evaluation was real, it was honest, and it was not arrived at overnight. He called LeBron James before going public with this. Let that breathe for a second. He didn't call his agent first, at least not in the sequence that mattered emotionally. He called LeBron, a man who loved Cleveland with every fiber of his competitive identity, who felt the weight of that city on his back for years, and who ultimately made the professional decision that his championship window required a different environment. Garrett wasn't asking LeBron for permission. He wasn't looking for validation or someone to tell him what he already knew. He was asking for perspective on what the transition feels like, what it costs emotionally, what it demands of you as someone who has publicly represented a city and a fan base. That phone call tells me everything about where Garrett's head is. This is not frustration talking. This is a man who has done the work, had the hard conversations, and made peace with what he's saying. And then Andrew Berry steps in front of the microphone. And here's where I need you to pay close attention, because the language of NFL front offices is a specific dialect, and once you learn to read it, you can never unhear it. Berry did not deny the trade request. He recited Garrett's accomplishments. Career Brown, face of the franchise, first overall pick, with the measured precision of someone reading from a document they prepared specifically to avoid saying anything that could be quoted against them later. Those are not the words of a man who has resolved the situation. Those are the words of a man who is managing a situation while hoping something shifts before it gets worse. There's a difference between conviction and stall tactics delivered professionally, and what Barry showed us in that press conference was the latter. Now here's the layer that I don't think gets enough attention, and it's crucial for understanding why Garrett's frustration runs so deep. Jim Schwartz. That name is important. Schwartz was the defensive coordinator who built one of the most historically dominant defenses Cleveland has fielded in recent memory. He had relationships with those players. He had Garrett's trust and respect in a way that matters enormously when you're talking about a player-coach dynamic on the defensive side of the ball. And when the head coaching position came open, Schwartz was reportedly a candidate. Garrett was campaigning for him. Not quietly, not behind closed doors and whispers. Openly, visibly, in the way that a franchise cornerstone advocates for someone he believes in. Todd Monken got the job. And look, from an offensive vision standpoint, that might well be the right call. Monken's offensive mind is legitimate, and his commitment to building something real with this roster is not in question. But losing Schwartz in the process created a wound on the defensive side of this organization that is apparently never fully closed. Garrett went to bat for his guy, publicly invested his reputation in that advocacy, and his guy didn't get the job. Then Watson, a decision that Garrett watched unfold with what multiple people close to the situation have described as mounting disbelief, remains on the roster in a situation that the entire football world understands is complicated at best and organizationally paralyzing at worst. And then ownership continues making decisions that, according to multiple insiders, do not reflect what the football people inside the building are actually recommending. Layer those three things on top of each other: losing Schwartz, the Watson situation, and an ownership dynamic that consistently produces decisions the football staff didn't advocate for. And you start to understand that Garrett's dissatisfaction is not about any single thing. It's cumulative. It's the result of years of watching an organization make choices that compound on each other in ways that systematically undermine the possibility of the one thing he came here to do. And Garrett, who restructured his deal and stayed in Cleveland specifically because he was told that championships were attainable, is now sitting here with clear eyes, looking at the cumulative result of all those choices and asking himself the question that every elite competitor eventually has to answer honestly. Is this the right place? That Rich Eisen appearance was not accidental timing. It was a message delivered with the specific calmness of someone who has already moved past the emotional stage of a decision and arrived at the communicative stage. He wanted the people inside that building to hear it in a format they couldn't dismiss. And he delivered it with enough specificity and composure that nobody in the Cleveland front office could credibly pretend they didn't understand exactly what was being said. Now, let me connect this to Shedeur Sanders in the way that I think it deserves to be connected, because this is the thread that keeps getting pulled at from the edges, without anyone fully following it to the center. Garrett has been one of Shedeur's most prominent internal supporters since the moment the rookie quarterback arrived in the building. He's spoken publicly about the things that genuinely impress him: the fact that Shedeur is in the coaches' offices before anyone else shows up, that he's watching film when most players are still sleeping, that his preparation has a seriousness and an intentionality that commands respect from everyone who sees it up close. That kind of public endorsement from the most respected player on the roster is not a casual thing. It carries weight inside a locker room that goes far beyond what any press conference or organizational memo could generate. It tells everyone in the building that the evaluation of who should be leading this offense has already been made by the people who actually see it every day from close range. And then the Browns release their workout photos. 2 photos of Deshaun Watson, 1 photo of Shedeur, mic'd up for content. I've been thinking about those photos since the moment I saw the sequence, and I want to tell you what I think the organizational communication embedded in those choices actually says. Miking Shedeur up for content is valuable, genuinely valuable in terms of building his brand and bringing fans into his experience. But it's a different kind of acknowledgement than centering him in the practice photography as the unambiguous face of this offense going forward. And documenting Watson twice in the same session, in a context where the football evaluation has reportedly already settled on Shedeur as the future, sends a signal: intentional or not, that the organizational commitment to that evaluation is not yet total. It's hedging. And Garrett, who has spent 8 years inside a professional football organization and knows exactly how to read the signals that organizations send through their public communication choices, is apparently reading those signals and drawing the conclusions they invite. I keep coming back to Todd Monken because I think his position in all of this is one of the most difficult in coaching right now, and I don't think he gets enough credit for navigating it as well as he has. This is his first head coaching job at the NFL level. His offensive vision is sound, his evaluation process is honest, and his commitment to Shedeur, as demonstrated through every rep distribution decision and every carefully chosen word in press conference settings, is real and documented. But a head coach can only push so far in one direction when the person who writes the checks is not fully aligned with the vision being implemented on the practice field. And what multiple sources have described about Jimmy Haslam's ownership pattern is consistent enough and alarming enough that it has to be named directly. The football people make their recommendations, the front office processes those recommendations, and then Haslam arrives at decisions that don't always reflect what the people who actually understand football suggested. That pattern is not conjecture. It's the Watson contract. It's the Schwartz situation. It's the ongoing ambiguity around the quarterback position in a context where the football evaluation should have already made the answer clear, and it's the reason that Garrett, who has more institutional knowledge of how this organization operates than anyone on the roster, has apparently concluded that the disconnect between what the football people know and what the decision-makers at the top are willing to commit to is too fundamental to ignore any longer. Here's what I want you to sit with, because I think this is the part of the story that matters most when you look past the immediate drama and think about what Cleveland is actually trying to build. Shedeur Sanders has done everything right. Everything. He came into the most complicated organizational environment imaginable for a rookie quarterback, with Watson still on the roster, with ownership questions swirling, with a fan base divided, with a national narrative that was skeptical of him before he threw a single NFL pass. And he responded to every single one of those pressures by showing up earlier, working harder, and letting his preparation speak for itself. He hasn't complained about the noise. He hasn't given interviews where he campaigns for his own starting role. He's just been present, consistent, professional, and competitive in ways that have impressed even the people who arrived at training camp most doubtful about him. That kind of resilience, maintained inside a pressure environment that would have cracked a lot of young players, is genuinely rare. And it matters not just as a character trait, but as a football indicator, because the quarterback position in the NFL punishes mental fragility faster and more brutally than any other position on the field. The ability to process organizational dysfunction, external noise, and competitive uncertainty without letting any of it bleed into your preparation is exactly the quality that separates the quarterbacks who survive their first seasons from the ones who get consumed by them. Mandatory minicamp in June is the next real pressure point for this situation. If Garrett's trade request is still publicly unresolved when that date arrives, if there's still no clear organizational commitment to Shedeur as the unambiguous starter, if Watson's presence on the roster is still generating ambiguity that the football staff has to navigate around rather than work through, then the combination of those unresolved threads creates exactly the kind of dysfunction that derails seasons before they start. A franchise cornerstone who is publicly unhappy and wants out. A quarterback situation that remains deliberately clouded despite an internal evaluation that has reportedly already settled. An ownership dynamic that the football people have learned to work around rather than trust completely. And a first-time head coach trying to build genuine organizational momentum inside a building where the external pressures keep undercutting the internal work. The thing that makes this particularly painful for Cleveland fans, and I say this as someone who feels the weight of this story, is that the pieces for something real are actually there. The offensive rebuild has been genuine. The receiving room has been reconstructed with real intention. Shedeur's talent and preparation are not in question among the people who see him every day. Garrett, when fully engaged and aligned with his organization, is the most disruptive defensive presence in football. Monken's offensive system is legitimate. The roster, evaluated honestly, has genuine potential. But potential is a currency that expires, and the decisions that need to be made right now, about Garrett, about Shedeur, about the organizational alignment between the football people and ownership, have a deadline that the calendar is ticking toward, whether anyone in that building is ready to face it or not. The resolution to all of this, if it comes, is not complicated. It requires Haslam to look at what the football people are telling him, what the practice field evidence is showing him, and what the best defensive player in football is saying loudly enough for the entire NFL world to hear, and make the decision that the evidence demands. Commit fully and finally to Shedeur Sanders as the starting quarterback. Give him the unconditional platform that his preparation has earned and his organizational supporters have been advocating for. Give Garrett a reason to believe that the direction of this franchise is worth his continued investment. Close the gap between what the football people know and what the people at the top are willing to publicly stand behind. If that happens, if the organizational alignment finally catches up to the football reality, then the Garrett situation becomes resolvable, the locker room unifies behind a clear identity, and Cleveland walks into training camp with something that this franchise has been missing for a very long time: genuine momentum built on honest commitment rather than carefully managed ambiguity. If it doesn't happen, the clock doesn't pause. June arrives and the fault lines that have been building pressure for years finally produce the kind of rupture that sets franchises back not for a season, but for a cycle. The pressure is real, the window is narrowing, and the decision that determines which version of this story Cleveland gets to tell is sitting on a desk in that building right now, waiting for someone with enough authority and enough courage to finally sign it.